Today is February 8th, 2025, and this is episode 296 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is the illustrious Mr. Andrew Kellett.
I've been called many things by many people. I don't know if I've ever been called illustrious.
Well, it's always the first time for everything.
It's true. How are you, sir?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I am good. I'm gearing up for the big game tomorrow. Some sort of sports ball event in the U.S.
The Puppy Bowl, that's right.
And the Kitten Halftime Show.
And the Kitten Halftime Show.
Cannot forget. So that's exciting for me.
And then there's some high dollar commercials later in the day to watch too.
Which is always entertaining to see. I remember fondly the just before the .com era bubble exploded, how many interesting commercials are being thrown on the Super Bowl by people with way too much money and not enough sense. So it's good times.
I still find EDS to have had the best Super Bowl commercials. The cat herding and the building the airplane in the sky. Those were my favorites. I miss those days.
Well, maybe they'll come back. You never know. Everything old is coming back around. You don't know.
True.
Could happen.
It's very true. All right. So just a reminder before we get into the stories that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and not those of our employers. Even when some of us have employers. That is.
I was going to say, your various personalities are employing the other personalities, so I guess that's fair.
Yeah. They pay rent, so there's that. They
don't have squatters' rights at this point, where they're just, trying to evict them, but you can't.
They just won't leave. All right. And then also, I do want to express appreciation for our Patreon donors. Thank you very, very much. If you would like to support our mission here, you can do so on our Patreon site at defensive. It's patreon.com/defensivesec. And I'll make sure there's a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, you guys are awesome. Thank you. Really do appreciate it. It helps cover the costs, and it's one reason why we don't have ads on the show, and we don't have people controlling our editorial and telling us what we have to say.
And for heaven's sake, there's no stupid Squarespace ad or whatever.
Yet.
All right. So getting into our stories, the first one today comes from SC Media. The title here is Ransomware Attackers Turn to Workers for Data Breach Access, which is stunning. I think in the ever evolving cat and mouse game, I was trying to think of the word arms race. It's a better term. I think that the adversaries are continuing to try to find innovative new ways to execute their mission. And I suspect this is something of a tacit acknowledgement that, maybe it's getting a little harder in some instances to pull off ransomware attacks in the traditional manner. And so this report is about an increasing evolution of tactics where the adversaries are actually enticing employees of companies to help facilitate access, through a variety of different ways, like remote access. And I've heard my friend Bob talk about employees selling VPN credentials to adversaries. So I think there's quite a few different ways that this can materialize, but it's certainly something to be on the lookout for. And I think it's really difficult to defend against because a lot of times the employees, the way this is happening is it's looking like relatively legitimate access. using legitimate authorized credentials. And I suspect, there may be some opportunities to look at, impossible travel or something like that. But I think it's a novel tactic that's going to be very difficult to defend against.
Yeah. So as I read this, apparently, like when a ransomware actor either gets a foothold or maybe just straight up is doing some sort of random email, it's a little couple different ways you could start, but they're basically telling the employee, "Hey, we'll pay you if you help us facilitate our crime here. We'll give you some money in some way, shape, or form." In theory, and it reminds me a little bit of, remember the Business Software Alliance ads for, is your employee pirating software?
Yes.
You can get a reward if you turn them in. Of course, that was, lawful-ish copyright civil case stuff. This is straight up crime. So a little, maybe not the same, but it's really interesting. And here's the thing. It's like it's straight up using greed to turn somebody into an insider threat. And I imagine it will be somewhat successful, especially if you've got disgruntled employees. And now you've got this opportunity that shows up in front of them to say, "Hey, is it really going to hurt if I run this software that somebody wants me to run on my machine? And maybe I'll get a couple days off while they clean it up. I can see it, and then I get paid." It could be bad mojo. I think that there's a certain amount of, sadly, employees who would be happy to harm their employer if they're disgruntled.
Especially in the current climate, I have to say that we're probably maybe more likely to see people being apt to do this than we have been in the past. Between the mass layoffs and people having to pick up more work than they had originally agreed to, and a lot of the relatively draconian return to office policies, I suspect that there's perhaps more than the normal share of people who would be willing to do this. The one that gosh, has probably been 15 years ago. A researcher was, I think it was in Central Park. They were giving away candy bars, like Hershey candy bars, in exchange for their work password, and being surprisingly effective at it. So, I think, look, I don't know how much, not necessarily how much money is being exchanged or could be exchanged, but it is certainly something to be on the lookout for, especially if this turns into more of a trend. But again, I think there are a few, but not a lot of opportunities to catch this. Again, the adversary is really asking employees or paying employees for remote access in some form or fashion, whether that's an RDP, a VPN, installing some sort of software. So, I would say a lot of the kind of the basics still come into play here, like looking for um, egress to known bad sites, looking for, again, impossible travel on VPNs, and for heaven's sake, not permitting RDP on your edge. And then
Yeah.
obviously lots of other sorts of less exciting controls like EDR, looking for reverse shells and that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about somewhere in the terms of, let's say you're defending against a successful phishing attack. It's somewhat potentially the same controls. Like, if someone were to be a victim of a successful phishing attack, one of the ways we try to mitigate that is not allow that account to have enough permissions to do too much damage, right? So not run as admin, not have EDR or similar monitoring for malicious software attempting to be run on that host, not allow them to run software. That sort of thing could be similar if because one of the tactics in this article was, "Hey, here's a piece of malware I want you to run on your local host." So one avenue of that is, okay, how do I contain that like I would any other piece of malware run on one of my machines? But if they're just straight up giving out creds, even if they're phishing resistant creds, if they are in collaboration with a bad actor, they can facilitate that by just giving them temporary code as it's being generated or whatever it takes that allows that sort of thing to happen. And yeah, it could get ugly. I mean, certainly there may be some. I'm hoping that, and this hope is not a strategy, but I'm hoping that this is relatively rare and not the beginning of a new large scale tactic, because this one would be ugly. And of course, let's be clear,
Heck
this is
yeah.
very, very illegal. If you're considering doing this, you will probably go to jail. So good luck.
And you'll probably be found too. Right? This is it's not like anyway. I certainly would advise against this. There's better ways of making money.
Yes. But if you do it and you make a lot of money, feel free to donate to our Patreon.
That's true. That's true. Feet pics sell pretty well, I've heard.
Not mine, sadly. I was paid to take them down, so I felt that was pretty, successful.
Look, it's like the saying goes, everybody makes you happy. Some people are happy. You make you happy when they arrive, and some people make you happy when they leave. Like it's a similar sort of thing.
That's why
You
you're so
made
happy
you
when you're.
made money.
Is that why you're so happy when we're done recording? Because you're done with me for the week?
I go have a party. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Next story.
Right. Our next one comes from Dark Rating, and the title here is LLM hijackers quickly incorporate DeepSeek API key. So this is not a surprising development. Access to LLMs on cloud hosting companies is typically fairly expensive computationally and from a billing perspective. And it's not hard to imagine that access is useful to all manner of people and would in particular be useful to use without having to pay the bill. I can tell you, having worked at a cloud provider, I saw lots and lots and lots of instances where customer accounts had been compromised, typically through some issue caused by the customer, which facilitated access to some adversary having the ability to create resources in their account, and almost exclusively, although not, there were some edge cases, almost exclusively they were used to mine cryptocurrency, and this is a new permutation of that. Then rather than mining cryptocurrency, they're creating resources. They're creating these LLM resources, and then further, they're packaging them up in a way that allows many people through a proxy to use an LLM that is being paid for by some unwitting victim of credential theft, where the access to their cloud account has been compromised. That access is added to a proxy server, and then basically arbitrary people, I suppose sometimes they pay for that access and sometimes they don't, are able to use that proxy server and run their their LLM workloads without having to pay the actual cost. And so they talk about in this article how that can be quite expensive, on the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars. They talk about one particular case where someone in the course of 24 hours racked up a $700 bill and only caught it because he had his AWS uh, account billing alert set so that when his normal $2 per month spend was exceeded, he got an alert and was able to shut it off. And I think AWS even forgave that $700 bill. But he was on path. He was on a path to have like a $20,000 bill for the month, which is really quite crazy. And so I think this was an individual person, right? It wasn't not like a company, but you can certainly see that how if you are a company, and Lord knows most cloud provider bills are pretty obtuse and unapproachably complex. It's not hard to imagine that this could happen to you, and people are leeching off of your bills, and maybe not even aware of it because it's just kind of blending into the background of your monthly bills. But look, this can and has been used to do malicious things. So I don't necessarily know that you're creating like a legal exposure for yourself, but you're certainly contributing to some bad stuff happening in the world.
Yeah, just to reemphasize, this isn't just ripping off services from the LLM providers. It's not ripping it off from ChatGPT or uh, DeepSeek. It's their customers whose their API keys that they're billed against is getting used by third parties. So your account, if you're one of these victims, is what's getting charged for doing this, and uh, that's what makes this. And they load balance it out basically through these reverse proxies over many different. So it's really hard to identify. It's really hard to know where the source is, and then they're selling. Probably we don't know exactly the economics, but they're selling access to using your account to go talk to these LLMs and do whatever they want to do, running up those charges. So yeah, I mean, in a worst case scenario, somebody could be generating child porn images or other very nasty material that now you're associated with, which is even a worse case scenario than just a financial problem. So yeah, it's and I fear a little bit, especially with the case of DeepSeek, as we've seen so many reports come out uh, showing that their security is very weak and their concern around security seems to be very weak. Best we can tell from afar, just looking at the reports coming out, I fear that it, it may be a little easy or too easy to get access to these API keys. And this is as all these other potential LLMs just rush into this market. Security sometimes is a laggard in terms of getting it locked down well. And they're just innovating so fast that security is trying to play catch up. And I think this contributes to that problem.
Yeah, I think that let's certainly agree with what you said. And I think to carry that further, I think the consumers are equally moving fast and immature too. And so I think that's where I saw a lot of problems emerging on just the kind of the vanilla cloud side is that you have a lot of relatively immature companies spinning up resources and their focus is on developing an application and they make a misstep, they contribute they commit some source code into public GitHub that has an API key, and suddenly now people are able, some adversary collects that key. By the way, we found that that was happening like in minutes. They would collect the API key and then launch resources in that cloud account to, and again, typically it was to mine cryptocurrency, but in this instance, it's to use LLM, which is a very expensive, relatively speaking, a very expensive workload to be having hijacked from you. So, it's I think for most entities, it's going to be a financial impact. It's not like necessarily it's going to provide access and some data of yours or what have you. Although depending on what the keys have access to, it could, right? Like the core of the issue here is that adversaries are finding valid API keys or credentials to these whether they're cloud accounts or AI service accounts. They're finding working credentials, and then they're using those. Now,
And if you've got like a corporate private instance or corporate private tenant of one of these, with the concept of that you're submitting all this sort of sensitive data with the assumption that it'll be private, now you've got a bad actor potentially being able to extract some of that very sensitive information that you've sent to that LLM instance. Maybe. I mean, that's not the direct version of what's going on here, but it's certainly possible.
yeah, so
So,
it's not a net new, like the initial intrusion isn't net new. Like this is stuff we've talked about for quite some time. It's we have to do a better job at protecting our secrets, authentication keys, API keys, passwords, and whatnot. This is just a new harm that can come as a result of not doing that well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this evolves. It's a brave new world around all these LLMs.
All right. So our next story comes from the Wall Street Journal, and the title here is Phishing Tests, the Bane of Work Life and Are Getting Meaner.
Just like you.
That's right. So this article, it's behind a paywall, but I'm confident that the smart people listening to us who may not subscribe to Wall Street Journal can figure out how to get to it.
Indeed.
Um, the story here is they actually give a pretty, I would say, alarming use case that exemplifies the issue. And this was at University of California, Santa Cruz. And the person they interviewed talked about how they received what turned out to be a phishing simulation email that was asserting that there was an Ebola outbreak at the college. And so that caused panic. Like, this person talked about how they had a friend who's an epidemiologist, and they got a lot of people torqued up about this. And then they clicked on the email and realized, and were then told that they failed the phishing test. And they go on throughout the article to talk about how there's actually a subreddit where I guess both victims and IT people talk about their antics, I suppose, um, with phishing simulation emails and the different lures that people have used, such as emails, sending out emails that claim that there's open enrollment, or claiming that there's a giveaway for Super Bowl tickets, or I think there was one about a puppy was loose in the parking lot, and how on its face, like, it's it's obvious that people are going to want to click on that because it is, it's hitting emotions. Like, it is doing the thing that causes people to want to click. And so it's kind of unsurprising that it works. It almost would be surprising if it didn't work. But then they go on to say that it's kind of two two issues. Number one is it's really turning people off to the whole concept, and I would go so far as to say it's creating a bit of a rift between kind of the general user population, who are the recipients of these tests, and the IT team who are charged with protecting them. But also there's some growing evidence that they refer to in this article about how that isn't necessarily effective, and in some instances, some reports or some research shows that it actually may work in the opposite direction. These phishing simulations and subsequent training may actually lead to a sense of overconfidence, which then can contribute to people being more susceptible to actually clicking on phishing links. And I think there's a line, like, just from my perspective, like, there's a line that you you can create really compelling phishing emails or phishing simulation emails, but then you have to ask, well, what's the point, right? If
Yeah.
is the point really to write a phishing lure that is so good that all of your employees click on it? Because if that's the case, what did you learn?
Hmm.
I don't think that's personally. I don't think that's a very useful thing. Now, they do talk about, they interview at the very end of the article. They interview a CISO at a medical. I think it's a CISO at a medical company, or I think it's a health insurance company, who talks about how they have a different, and I would say far more draconian approach. And what they do is, if you fail a phishing test, you lose external email access for 3 months. And if you fail it a second time, you lose external email access for a year. And if you fail it a third time, you are terminated as an employee. And now they do say that they've never terminated any employees, but the insinuation is that they have locked people out of their email. But I, you know, the whole concept here feels like transferring the problem from IT and IT security to the user base, who, like, you're giving them a laptop or a PC that has the ability to click on links, and then you're sending them the links, and you're saying, like, as a part of your job, you're going to have to click on some, but not others. Good luck figuring them out. Godspeed.
Yeah. I strongly disagree with that approach of this. Uh, it was they were interviewing the chief information officer of Lehigh Valley Health Network about his 3 strikes and you're fired. I have very strong opinions on this topic anyway. I feel I actually am not a fan of phishing simulation tests. I think that any person at one time or another can become a victim. I shouldn't say fall for, could become a victim of a social engineering attack, a psychological attack, because that's what these are. And even our language is such that we say they fell for it. They were tricked by it. And it implies that there's a moral, ethical, or intelligence failure on the part of the employee when they become a victim of one of these attacks. I disagree with that. I think that's wrong. I think that our job is to protect them from these attacks and to ensure that when they are a victim, because they will inevitably become a victim, that it doesn't cause too much damage. Now, they may not like that we have to build restrictions in their capabilities to protect themselves from these attacks. That can be a problem. But and it could potentially hurt their productivity if they don't have local admin rights. But losing external email access for 3 months probably hurts somebody's productivity. Uh, this sort of punitive mindset of you're so dumb that you fell for this attack and now you must be punished, I think is the worst aspect of security people's mindset, of them lauding over their users the mythical and magical power of information security. And we're just smarter than all of you. And you're just so dumb. And look how dumb you are. And I think that there's a real aspect of that in our industry that is just wrong. And I've said it before, and we've been on conferences where I've given a talk on this, or I think anybody's susceptible. I think they're not paid to care about this. They're paid to do other things. I'll give you an example. If a recruiting department is paid to look at resumes and somebody crafts a really smart social engineering attack that looks like somebody submitting a resume, they're going to open that resume. It's our job is to give them a way to open that resume safely, not to make them figure out that somebody used a weird character in a domain name that is very obscure. We're asking too much of our users, and these phishing simulation tests feel like this default. You just have to do it, and it shows up in everybody's reports of, are you doing third party risk management? Are you doing phishing tests? And we're not asking if these are effective. We're not asking the efficacy. We're not asking the second order impacts of this. We're just taking it for rote that we have to do this as an industry, and that all responsible commercial entities do phishing tests to train their employees. I disagree. I even organizations I've worked at, we do it, and I don't think it's the right approach. I really don't. I think the right approach is, how do I assume that my users are going to be a victim of a sophisticated phishing attack in the worst possible way, and how do I defend against that? In my slightly ranty 2 cents, I would probably be more ranty if I weren't feeling a little under the weather today.
I agree. People are not a firewall. You can't program rules into a person, and even the same person will, as you alluded to, will make different decisions based on different things happening, different times of the day, different days of the week, different weeks of the month, different months of the year. People are not automatons. They will make suboptimal decisions. They will make mistakes. They will they're trying to typically accomplish a mission as part of their job, and that sometimes requires them to click on a link. And again, if the security of your organization is dependent on that, I think you got a problem. Now, I think the contra, because I have had this argument with so many people over the years, And the contra argument that people are probably yelling at their car radio or their iPhone or whatever right now is, well, yeah, but if you can train people to be more effective at recognizing phishing, like it's not perfect, but you can cut down on the number of potential attacks that you have to defend against. And I think that's it's a fair point. But I still go back to, I think there's a line. I think there's a line of ethics. Like I think it's unethical to send out a phishing lure, like a phishing simulation test that says there's a that your dog is loose in the parking lot, or
Yeah.
or a phishing lure that says hey, open enrollment starts now. Like I just, yeah, it's one of the most, I'm proud of this one, I guess, but I'm ashamed to say it. Well, one of the most effective ones we did was working for a company who didn't often refresh their employee laptops. Our lure was, you are eligible for a replacement laptop. Click here to register. And damn near everybody that got it fell for it.
Yeah. I,
So, and then, but like, what was the point?
the other problem with phishing training is you're training to a certain type of phishing attack in general, a certain level of sophistication, a certain look and feel that is pretty, you know, for those of us in the industry, you can recognize them very fast. They're fairly formulaic. And if you go past, and here's the problem, is the bad guys can adapt. They get a vote. They can change their tactics. So if you keep changing your phishing tactics, at some point you're going to exhaust the user's ability to like absorb and care. And we live and breathe this every day. So it's intuitive to us. This is what I think security people forget about, is things that are intuitive to us are just black magic voodoo to a lot of non-technical people. And it's not that they're stupid. They don't live in our world. Like, think about your finance people who they have intuitive knowledge of very deep arcane finance rules and laws that would just be mind-blowingly complex to those of us who haven't spent their career in it. It's the exact same thing on the flip side. If we can look at a phishing, that's clearly phishing. But that doesn't translate unless you spend your entire career thinking and caring about this. And there's probably some aspect of our brains that are wired in a certain way that predisposes to being able to understand that, which is why we're in this career path to begin with. So if we train people against a certain attack type or a certain thing to look for, like check this and check that and check this, that's assuming the bad guys never adjust their technique. So, and you can't expect your users to constantly keep up the arms race with the bad actors. It's on us to defend that, whether it's trying to apply email security tooling for what it's worth. That, I think a decent email security tool gets that same thing you're talking about, which is that low order, obvious stuff that training would have caught. Same thing, a good email security tool probably would do the same thing. And I don't know. I mean, awareness matters, and I want people to be aware. I don't know that training them with simulations in our current approach is all that effective, and being punitive about it, I really disagree with. So I don't know. I'm on probably the minority in this argument. I know many people feel strongly that these are important and necessary and effective. I'm a contrarian on this topic, and I know that.
And there's an entire industry that's spawned around around this whole area. So I look, every compliance framework, every security framework is increasingly coming to expect that this is in place. But I'm just not sure that this is the place to test to failure, I guess, is the best way I would describe it. Like, I just don't see the value in doing what was described in this article. I think that there is some value in some cursory awareness, but I think it can go too far, and I think that the effectiveness and the usefulness is it degrades. I just don't.
Well,
I don't
and
see the value in that.
I also strongly disagree with the concept of attaching a failure or something to a failed phishing test, like a punitive, shameful response. Because let's say when that user really does fall for an actual phish and they've already been punished by you for missing something, do you think they're going to be eager to report it? Or are
No,
they going to
no, but
hope
they're
nobody
probably going to
notices?
call up the BitLocker people or whatever the heck the
The
not
ransomware
BitLocker,
operators who are
not
buying internal
BitLocker.
access?
That's
Yeah.
that would have been a great ransomware name, but it's actually Microsoft's disk encryption.
Some would argue, same difference.
Fair enough.
Uh, anyway, yeah, I just don't think it's the right path. But you're right. We have just taken it for granted now, and every framework and every best practice and every maturity curve and everybody's best practice all say, "Oh, you got to do phishing training." Have we stopped to really analyze if that's still a valid assumption? And this argues that it's not. This is pointing to various studies and research pointing that it's actually harming your susceptibility to actual phishing attempts. So I don't think that it's just going to change, though. Honestly, I really don't. I think this is so built into our DNA now that it's not going to change. But I would argue that it's a mistake.
No, but it'll give us the same thing to talk about every couple episodes.
Right, and give me an opportunity to rant, which apparently
Mm-hmm.
people enjoy.
Absolutely. All right. Our next story comes from Security Week. And the title here is Security Teams Pay the Price, the Unfair Reality of Cyber Incidents. Oh, so I would say, I would sum this up best as saying that if you are the janitor at a company, you tacitly acknowledge that part of your job is to clean up in the cafeteria when someone spills, right? This smacks of the same kind of thing. This appears to be a bit of a complaint about how decisions and actions taken by other parts of the business create a direct negative consequence on the IT security team. And whether that's as the result of an application security problem or some kind of compliance problem or a security incident, it's it all funnels back to the security team to have to go and clean it up. And I would say, like, that's their job. I think our job is also, by the way, to figure out what happened and to help the organization minimize the likelihood of that happening in the future. But it's this one is this it's surprising to me. Um, I mean, certainly, I, when I was the CISO, like I did on occasion call myself the head janitor, right? I head cyber janitor. That was not necessarily too far from the truth. Like, it is part of your job duty is to clean up after the messes that can happen in other parts of the business. But again, it it allows us to understand how to make sure that doesn't happen again. And so anyway, I thought this was an interesting topic because I suspect a lot of IT or a lot of infosec organizations kind of feel this down, deep down, like some animosity to other parts of the business who are making mistakes and screwing up, and then perhaps not necessarily feeling the heat or the implications of their quote actions.
Yeah, it's the whole if they would just listen to us, or if they were just smarter, if they were just, did it the right way, we wouldn't have had this issue. And now we've got to clean this up. And I think you're right. There's an aspect of I don't know that that's ever going away. That's part of why we have jobs, sadly. It, it sort of reminds me of there's a famous scene in Mad Men that's also now like a famous meme of Peggy and Don are working late and Peggy's upset because Don's not giving her enough credit for something. And, Peggy says, but you never say thank you. And Don says, that's what the money's for, right? Where he's like, I pay you, you give me ideas. That's the job. So there's some of that here. It's I get it. Like you're in security or IT, and somebody does something silly in your mind that directly causes you work. You could start to get resentful and angry about that. But understand that I think that there is a balance of letting companies do risky things to allow them to thrive. They cannot have risk zero and be successful. So our job is to help them understand where the line is that's gone too far. And frankly, our job is often to clean up the mess when something has happened. And we also have active adversaries attempting to do bad things. This isn't just carelessness internally. This is you have bad actors or threat actors out there intentionally trying to break in, and yeah, we got to clean that stuff up. So I don't know. I agree with you. This article did feel a little like, but flip side of this is it acknowledges aspects of burnout and not maybe not directly, but that aspect of hey, there's a load that comes with doing this job, but I think that's true for any profession. You're in finance, and a sales guy goes and sells a deal, and the paperwork isn't just right. You've got to clean that up, or you got to go collect the money, or you got to deal with that, or you're in legal and you've got to review paperwork and contracts and fix things. Like that's kind of the job. That's why we're hired, is to facilitate that need for the business. And I don't know. I think there was kind of an implicit, if they just did XYZ, this wouldn't happen. I don't know that that's fair.
Look, every incident has a cause, right? And but not every incident is necessarily avoidable, or at least reasonably avoidable, especially in continuing to be in business. So I'm left wondering, what's the alternative, right? So
You
it's
lock down the business so much nobody can do anything, and they come begging for permission to install anything, and you go so slow and are so ineffective that you're quickly, outgunned by your competitors and you're out of business.
yeah, right. So I think for my experience, the objective was to internalize when bad things happen, internalize what happened, and use that as an opportunity to drive meaningful improvements as far upstream in whatever process as possible. Now, you're not going to be, as we just talked about, right? You're not going to be able to affirmatively stop every problem from ever happening again, right? You're not going to be able, if you have an incident that results from someone clicking on a phishing link, you're not going to be successful in forevermore preventing people from clicking on phishing links unless like the guy we talked about, you just ban people from using email,
Right.
right? Like you're just that's so then you have to look at, well, okay, what else can I do? Well, how do I mitigate the impact of the thing that happened? So recognizing that could happen, I'm going to move to phishing resistant credentials, or I'm going to do something different that mitigates the thing that we just experienced. That's what our job is. Like that was, you have to do some of this proactively. Obviously, you can't wait for everything to turn into a security incident. But the job is to help the business understand how to, how to operate more securely. One of the big inputs into that process is security incidents. And so, like, there's nobody else that's going to manage them for you. And it's not like you're going to be successful in having them never happen again. So who do you want to, I'm sorry, but like being flippant here, I guess, but like, who do you want to manage them? Who do you,
So part of what part of what I'm hearing you say is don't let a good crisis go to waste. That's part of what I'm hearing.
yes.
Um, I would say there's also times when you can't fix it and you shouldn't fix it. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're dealing with a DLP situation and you've got a disgruntled employee who's planning to leave the organization and wants to copy data to his personal device, which is not great. We don't want that. Like, that's company data. They're not supposed to do it. You could build very restrictive controls around that. But that'll have a down order impact on other people's ability to share data and work with customers and work with. So there's a cultural aspect there too of how controlling do you want to be with a technological control versus a policy, a written policy. And do you have the staff to manage it? Like, let's say in this case, you implement DLP. It's really noisy. You've got a lot of people are going to have to investigate it. You're going to be contacting employees going, what did you do this? Why did you do this? What's going on here? Can you show me that? It's going to have an impact. And that impact may be not appropriate for the level of pain the business is experiencing by the occasional DLP issue where somebody has left with some critical data. And I hate to say it, but there are times all the time, businesses take a look at a problem and go, it's not like the cure is worse than the disease. I'm not going to go down this path of what it's going to take to fix this yet because it's not causing me enough pain. I have better use for those resources in that time. And we just have to accept it. And I think the other aspect of this is not assuming somebody did something bad, but just somebody made a mistake or in our mind did something that we wouldn't have done. I think one of the things, again, going back to IT and security folks, is we have this assumption that everybody has the same skill set we have. And we're frustrated when they don't. Like, how did you not understand that about this thing? And again, I say, if you have that mindset, you should try to change that because they have their own specialties and their own skills typically and their own areas of interest that we don't have. And they're not trying to ruin your day. They just didn't know better, or they didn't, a mistake was made, or they don't have the skill set, or they come asking you for something silly, like at the last minute. And they don't understand that integration request they made is actually months of work and they need it in a week. And now you're upset. And you're upset because you think they should have known better. And they don't even understand the context of what they're asking. So they're not intentionally trying to frustrate you by not giving you enough lead time. They honestly don't know better. And I feel like this is somewhat of the same thing here. Like we have this expectation that everybody in the business has the same skill set, awareness, knowledge, goals, measurements, metrics, and reward systems that we have. And that is just not true.
Definitely agree that. No, I do agree with some of the recommendations at the very end of the article. Like most of the article is just setting up the problem, and there's like 2 or 3 sentences that talk about the recommendations. But they recommend building relationships across the business, ensuring that the requisite people, process, and technology are in place, and ensuring preparedness. So I think like making sure that you have a well honed or well oiled incident response process, so that you're not scrambling when and if something bad happens. But I certainly agree with with the concept of as you were talking, like that resonated a lot. Like one of the ways you avoid what you were just describing is building those relationships so that people will come and talk to you early, and you have, again, it's not ever going to be perfect. It's never going to be as efficient or seamless as you want it to be. But if you do build effective linkages to the business, you'll have more of an opportunity to be involved in those business decisions, not not so that you can be obstructionist, but so that you can help facilitate and make sure that things are happening on time or happening in a secure way, or what have you. But I think fundamentally speaking, though, this is our job, and I felt like, at least from a headline perspective, my initial gut reaction was, well, who on earth is supposed to do this if not IT security?
Yeah. And one thing that occurred to me as you were saying it, like if you're in a position where everything is just a well-oiled, perfect functioning, no friction, no drama, you're probably not innovating. It's probably a very
Yes.
static, or very slow, bureaucratic, red tape driven process. And that's probably not where your business wants to be if you're trying to get stuff done.
Yeah, and I would further say that you might think that it's well oiled, but I'm going to bet that your business partners might not.
You know what else is well oiled?
Tell me what. Can't,
No,
can't
no,
imagine what you're going to say.
I'm just going to put it out there and let the audience fill in the punchline.
Oh dear.
Guess what else I
Oh.
filled in last?
Anyway, our last story today comes from darkreading.com, and the title here is Employees Enter Sensitive Data into Gen AI Prompts Far Too Often.
It's almost like Gen AI is a theme of problems.
Well, I think it's the gift that is going to keep on giving to security people for quite some time. The story here is that a company who I'm sure has offerings that can help you mitigate your exposure to people entering stuff into LLMs
For a
improperly
very reasonable fee,
for,
I'm sure.
for an extremely reasonable fee. They did a study monitoring, which like this is so meta, and not the company meta, but the concept meta, that it kind of hurts my head. Like the whole point here is that employ employees are entering data into LLMs that contain sensitive information, and the concern is that people who aren't authorized to see that information might be able to see the information. And in order to complete this study, they had people having access to the information they say that they shouldn't have access to. Anyway, it's very tangled up in my mind. But anyway, they did analyze some percentage of chat inputs to a variety of different LLMs from OpenAI to Perplexity and many others. I don't know that DeepSeek was one of them. And what they found was a little bit alarming. One was that um, customer data was in 45% of the sensitive data that was shared. So almost 46%. And that is an obvious concern because typically you have confidentiality agreements with your customers. And as they point out in here, the typically these LLMs, again, unless you're running the LLM yourself, or you have some kind of special agreement in place with a provider, the data that your employees are entering is probably being incorporated in some means into future iterations of the model. And there's a concern that perhaps security researchers might have access to the data that they're inputting, or that in the future some some enterprising actor might be able to reverse engineer, whether that's through like some kind of a jailbreak, or trick the LLM into exposing the data that it was trained on. I don't know if that is, I can't think of an example where that has happened in the past, but it's perhaps not impossible to think that that could happen. The net point is
Or
that,
or or
go
chat
ahead.
logs or whatever just get leaked, like we saw with DeepSeek.
Yes, good point. That's
Straight
right.
straight up just leaked.
That's right. So 47 or 46% is customer data. Employee data is 27%. And I think there's an insinuation that this is happening as a result of managers relying on AI to help facilitate decisions on things like pay increase, how to equitably, or maybe not even equitably, but how to distribute pay raises and bonuses and promotions and things like that. And in order to do that, you're often having to upload or enter fairly sensitive personal information about the employees that are in that population. And I think that,
Which is why
beyond. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I would say, which is why I've gone to every LLM out there and told it that anytime somebody asks about me, I should get the maximum raise. I'm
It's a,
training it.
it's a very enterprising. You should start a company. I bet there's some venture capital in.
You know, It's like search engine optimization, but LLM optimization.
Let's call it proactive reputation management.
That's brilliant.
There
I
we
mean,
go.
maybe we could finally get those rumors about those dead hookers in Vegas off your back.
Probably never going away.
Slowly.
Yeah. I mean, someday the sun will burn out.
The heat death of the universe is coming.
That's right. So, I think there's another issue that she'll run into, and it's not a broad issue that spans across all aspects, but relying on AI to help facilitate decisions, especially as it pertains to employees or to, you know, certain business processes. I'll use an example, like whether to give a loan to a person or not is the subject of its own regulations. And so even if you ignore the data privacy aspect of this, there's also a potentially very large exposure that you're creating if you have managers who are relying on these AI tools to help make business decisions that haven't been thought through. I mean, I'm not saying that you should never do that. I'm saying that it has to be done in an overt way, because you could very well have employees creating really horrific legal obligations for you that you're just wholly unaware of. And it's really not going to necessarily come and splash back on the manager who did it. That's going to be the fault of the employer. Now, the employer obviously is probably going to kick that manager to the curb, but how much damage could be done in the process.
And I think the reality is this is happening all day, every day. People are playing with this stuff all the time.
Yes.
And it's going to continue. It's going to get much worse. In fact, I think you're going to see some sort of AI involved in almost every aspect of business within 5 years, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The question is, how much do we cede decision-making authority to these tools that, at least at the moment, are known to have wildly inaccurate responses at times in unpredictable and non-intuitive ways. I think a lot of us have this intuitive, at least who have been in IT for a long time, have an intuitive belief system about how systems operate, right? It's like talking about the matrix. It's a system of rules, and it has to operate by those rules, but you can learn where those rules are. The thing with AI that I think is interesting is they're not intuitive rules, and we don't fully understand the rules. And so I don't think we fully understand how they can subtly break or subtly give us bad information. And we're used to a very logical output from computers. And I think these have shown us that they can do things that are not readily understood by us as to why they're doing what they're doing. But I will go back to, this horse has left the barn. This train has left the station. It is no turning back. You're not putting the toothpaste back in the tube. You're not unringing this bell. And I think we're along for the ride at this point. And any other analogy I can come up with for saying it's not going to stop.
No, it's for sure.
Nor do I necessarily 100% think it should. I think there's still plenty of upside value, but there's certainly some downside. And I think we as an industry tend to focus only on the downside. And as we said in our last show, if you're not willing to play ball with a lot of businesses on this topic, they're going to find someone who will.
So we'll get into the upside in a second. The next most common category was legal and finance information, which obviously can be sensitive things like mergers and acquisition information and that sort of thing. And then finally, security and security code, like 6.8 and 5.6%. And they do point out that this is, while it's the smallest segment of data, it's among the most sensitive, at least from a company's perspective, because, again, I think what we're seeing is that some security organizations are relying on LLMs to help make security decisions by inputting relatively sensitive information, perhaps like vulnerability scan results or pen test results or code scan results or even source code itself and asking for guidance on what to do. And again, if you're not if you're not careful, this can create a problem. Now, like you said, this horse has left the barn, and companies, and they talk about this in the article here, that if companies are not don't use AI to their own potential detriment because their competitors at this point almost certainly are. And so right now we're in this mad race, and I know it's very frustrating for so many people in the industry to watch. We're in this mad race for organizations to figure out how to most effectively use AI in their business. And this isn't necessarily to say like that we should not do this. It's not even to say that you shouldn't, you shouldn't use AI to help make these security decisions. It's that you should do it in a way that is acknowledged and overt by the company. Like you should use AI tools that you have an agreement with, where you have some kind of commercial terms that that cover the data protection and confidentiality. And I think that the challenge is that we're in this kind of a wild west where certainly the AI companies are very motivated and eager to sign customer companies up to those kinds of terms, but this is moving, I think, a lot faster than what a lot of the end companies are necessarily comfortable with. And so you see, I think, far too often employees, and even IT and InfoSec employees, just using personal accounts, kind of unaware of the potential risks. And so I think, we have to make sure that there's some awareness that, if you are doing this, it needs to be done in in a certain company sponsored or company approved way. But I think it's also super important that the company have a means, if this is going to be part of your strategy, that you have provided the means for employees to do this. Otherwise, you are unknowingly acknowledging that this is going to happen.
Yeah, I agree.
That's my
And
piece.
it's a complicated, yeah, it's a complicated area of governance that I think we're all still fumbling our way through.
Very much so. Very much so. And look, the usefulness or the utility of AI in companies is a hot topic right now. There's a lot of detractors, a lot of naysayers who are pretty skeptical of the utility. And I think I've seen some people say it best. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be useful. And I think that's certainly the case in a lot of use cases. I don't think it's the case in all use cases. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think that in 5 years' time, a lot of the crap that has been AI enabled or we're relying on AI will kind of fallen by the wayside, just like there are uses of cloud back in the late 2000s that we just don't do in cloud anymore because that we're past that part of the hype cycle. But the reality is, again, companies are trying to find their way. They're trying to figure out that competitive advantage. And I think the security people who are going to be most effective in the next couple coming years are going to be those that help their organizations navigate this most effectively, not just be like, stop, you can't do it, it's bad. It's going to be those that help find the way through the forest.
Yeah, 100% agreed. As uncomfortable as that may be, and as much as it goes against everything we think we believe in, I think it's your only realistic option, while still being highly employable.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So anyhow, um, I personally, I think it's certainly in a rapidly evolving space. I think one of the challenges we have is that kind of like the word cloud. It AI means a very broad set of things. It's not like one particular technology. The risks of using OpenAI's ChatGPT is different than the risks of using Perplexity or Claude or DeepSeek. Like they aren't one homogenous whole. They all have their own uniqueness, their own unique risks, their own things that they excel at. And even so, like the things that they're good at today or the way that their best use cases today may be vastly different in 6 months.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was talking to somebody about this. Like, they asked, "Hey, do you think AI could help with this particular problem?" I said, "Well, that's a really difficult question to answer because AI is such a wide-ranging set of technologies, and how do you plan to use it? In what sense? In what way? And so it's almost becoming such a generic term, like you said, like cloud or computer. Can a computer help with this? I don't know. What do you want it to do? How are you going to do it? And that's kind of, I think, where we're at.
yeah. So again, I for better or for worse, we're seeing a lot of I suspect a lot of uh, labor constraints as companies, try to force their focus on better leveraging AI to be more efficient, more cost effective, and more competitive. And I really think, especially now, the people who are going to be successful in this field and in the adjacent fields like IT are going to be those ones that embrace this and help find a way to responsibly manage it in and the risks, the associated risks in their organizations. Because I just don't think we're way past the point of saying no. Certainly, look, there's going to be companies out there who are super conservative and they're still, I guess, using green screens, right? There's I'm sure there's some companies out there that are like that, but the by and large, that's the exception, not the rule. Companies right now are trying to be very competitive in this market.
Yep, agreed. And yeah, nothing else to add. I concur.
All right, so with that, we conclude another beautiful episode of the Defensive Security Podcast. I certainly appreciate your time. I hope you all found this useful. Uh, and congratulations if you're still here. You made it about an hour and 9 minutes into the pain and Andy's bad jokes. So great job.
Look, I'm just preparing him for the real world.
It's harsh. It's harsh out there.
The more you bleed in training, the less you bleed in the real world.
That's right. So anyway, look, we appreciate your time and I know there's lots of podcasts out there, a hell of a lot more security podcasts out there now than there were when I first started this. So I guess it's been 13 years ago, which is just kind of crazy.
Crazy.
Seen a lot of stuff change, but definitely thank you very much. If you do like the show, give us some love on your favorite podcast app or iTunes, Spotify, what have you. YouTube, you can find the video version of this on YouTube. It's Defensive Podcasts. We put out all kinds of cool stuff, I think, on our YouTube channel. We're starting to branch out into Instagram, which is just exciting. And I hear TikTok is probably not too far behind, although I am trying to wait and see what ends up happening with TikTok before I get too excited.
I look forward to all of your dancing that all the kids do on TikTok.
I mean, look, it's what I have to do for the mission. Like if I have to do the TikTok dances, then I mean that's what I'm going to do.
I'm just going to have the hip surgeon on standby.
Good idea. At my advanced age, that's a very good idea. So anyway, you can find the links to the stories we talked about on our website at defensivesecurity.org. Just look for episode 296. If you want to follow me and my antics and my my pictures, I post online. It's Jerry at infosec.exchange. Just go to infosec.exchange, create an account, and follow me there, and you can interact with it's about 15,000 very active security people. So pretty good platform. And where can they find you?
Yep, I'm also on infosec.exchange at Lerg, L-E-R-G, also on X at Lerg, L-E-R-G.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again, and we will talk again next week. Take care.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.